And so, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Nick Cortina, and I'm here to show you Naverisk IT Services' new business intelligence reporting tool. Now, during today's session, we're going to review some basic application navigation and take a look at the three most commonly used designers and see what capabilities they provide. So what I'm going to do to get started is I'm just going to jump over to this reports section here, and selecting this business intelligence beta is what's going to take us to the page that we're seeing here now. Now, we're going to begin the discussion today by taking a look at our ExpressViews, and that's really a quick and easy way to interact with your data. We've got our advanced reports, and this is where we're going to get a little more fine-grained control over how and where certain data elements appear. And then finally, we're going to take a look at dashboards, and that's an interactive canvas on which we can choose to either display pre-existing reports or build new visualizations on the fly. And again, I just want to reiterate, in the interest of time, I'd ask that we do keep all those questions until the end. I do have some time allotted so we can have some interactive Q&A, and at that point, we can feel free to unmute and have some interactive discussion if we'd like. Now, before we do get to each of the individual designers, I want to go over some basic navigation of the application and get the lay of the land, if you will. Now, so on clicking this business intelligence beta, we can see that the interface is loaded up here, and we're presented with a getting started page. Now here, we're presented with some helpful video links that are going to provide basic insight on usage of the designers that I mentioned earlier, those being, again, ExpressView, Advanced Reports, and Dashboards. Now, we are recording this session, so you folks can always refer back to everything that we discussed today if you'd like, but if you do just want a quick refresher, something that's maybe just a little bit more digestible, just a few minutes in length, these videos are a really great way to just sort of bring yourself back up to speed if you do want some quick information. Now, most of the application that we're going to take here is driven from the left-hand pane. And here we can actually see that there's two folders that have been set up, and those are custom and sales revenue reports. Now, if I was to go look for a pre-existing report, I can use my search bar here, and if I maybe were to search the word test, we can see a couple test reports that have been built down below in this custom folder. And the other thing that we can do if we want to try to find some given reports is actually just click the drop downs here to expand that folder tree if we'd like. Now, if we right click on any given folder, or we use our little menu icon here, we're going to see some additional folder options, those being potentially adding a root level or child folder underneath the folder we've selected. And we can also directly create a report in the selected folder from this menu if we'd like as well. Now, in addition to some of our folder options, we've got our plus icon in the top left corner here, and this is an alternative avenue to generate a new report, another option instead of just clicking on the folder if we'd like. And on selecting Create New Report, we're going to see all of the available report types that we can select from. Now, again, for today's discussion, we're going to be honing in on ExpressViews, Advanced Reports, and Dashboards. And we'll give a little bit more context for each of those specific designers and when we might choose to use those designers as we go. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, all the way on the other corner here, we can see two other icons present. The first, the little wrench here, is where we can specify our startup reports if we'd like. So on selecting, we'll notice this Startup Reports menu. And here, what we can do is actually select any given report, potentially say this 3-month chart report, and drag it over to the right-hand side to denote this as a startup report. That means that the next time I come in and access the application, this report will automatically load and execute for me. I could potentially add multiple reports to this list if I'd like, or even use a dashboard here instead. So if I were to drag my example dash that I had created previously over, we could use that as a startup report if we'd like. Now, the other icon that we'll find here is our context-sensitive help. Now, on clicking the context-sensitive help, this is going to open up some help documentation that is contextually aware, meaning that it's going to open to whatever page is most appropriate given where you were previously in the application. Since we were on the Getting Started tab, we can see that this is opening up and showing us some information about getting started with the reporting tool. Now, as an example, if we happen to be, say, in the Advanced Report Designer and we were taking a look at some charting information, it would directly open up to the charts help documentation here. The same would be true for things like sorts, filters, or any of the other key concepts that we'll see later on in the session today. Now, another thing that you may have noticed is in the top left here, this help has opened up in a tab within the interface. Each report designer and subsequent report executions are all going to appear in tabs, and it's very similar to having multiple web pages open in tabs in a browser. As we build reports, we might find that we're going to end up with lots of tabs here open, particularly if we're iterating through making changes, executing a report, make some more changes, maybe execute again. And so it's always really a good idea for us to keep our eyes on these tabs and close tabs out as we're finished with them and really just sort of keep things in order for ourselves. With that in mind, we can use the little X icon here to close that tab. We can right-click the tab to see options. Again, just close that tab or close all other tabs if we'd like to do a more extensive cleanup. And then finally, the last little trick I like to highlight here is we can actually use the middle click with our mouse anywhere on the tab here to close that tab out as well. And that would be what you saw me doing just there. So now that we've gone over some basic navigation, let's dig into the first designer on our list, and that's going to be the ExpressView designer. So I've selected the ExpressView from our new report menu. And as it loads up, this designer is really meant to be the quickest and easiest way to access your data. It can even be used to quickly see live data so that we can make more informed decisions on building potentially more complex advanced reports. Now, on opening a new ExpressView, we can see we're prompted to begin dragging and dropping data fields here, and we'll pull those data fields from our data pane on the left-hand side. Now, we can click through categories of data to find the specific data fields that we want. And alternatively, we could choose to use the search bar here to go look for specific fields if we'd like as well. Now, the other nice thing that we have with regards to the searching here is the ability to tailor that search further to show only text, numeric, date time, or other fields. So to get this started, let's go ahead and just drag some data fields onto the canvas. We're going to keep the example simple for now. So let's start by dragging our client name over, and we'll see that after I've opened the ticket category, I can click and drag client name over to my canvas. If I maybe wanted to also show some ticket IDs, instead of clicking and dragging this time, I could just use the arrow here. And then finally, if I have our ticket statuses, we can double click and that'll also add the field there as well. Multiple options to get us to the same conclusion. It's really just about what your personal preference is. Now, one of the other things that the ExpressView designer is going to do for us is add some simple aggregations for each column that we add to the ExpressView. Now, clicking on any given column, we can see the various aggregations that we might like to set if we'd like. And now, because our client name column is a string column, it's got letters and potentially numbers in it. It's going to only allow us to show things like min, max, count, and distinct count. And that's because this value is not numeric. Now, with a value like, say, ticket ID, although contextually it might not make the most sense to sum this field, because it is a numeric field, we will have some additional options for the aggregations, those being sum and average. Now, while this initial report mockup that we've just generated, where you can see we've just got some dummy values, client name 1, ticket ID 1, ticket status 1, etc. This is just meant to give us an idea of what this ExpressView is going to look like when we actually go get some live data. We could certainly clean this up a little bit, and there's some things that we'll do to tidy this up. But if we just wanted to go see a quick view of the data and the information, we can hit this live data toggle up in the top left. And you can see that now we're actually querying the data source to see real-time information to fill out that structure that we had just previously built. At this point, we can scroll through to peruse the records as we'd like. We can use our paging options to go through pages and even jump all the way to the last or first pages if we'd like as well. And if we scroll down here, oh, looks like I'm getting booted, so I'll just have to log back in quick. All right, so once again, I'm just going to use that create new report, open up an ExpressView. And we'll just make that same quick ExpressView again, client name, ticket ID, and ticket status. And if I hit that live data one more time, I'm going to jump all the way to the end. And we could certainly peruse the records more if we'd like. But the other thing I did just want to show you folks was those row counts that are going to be coming back here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn my live data back off because I'm going to make some changes to this ExpressView. And we generally recommend turning live data off before making multiple changes. And the reason why is because every change we make with live data on is going to re-execute the query to the data source, meaning every time we make a change, we basically go back to the data source and say, hey, go get me updated information. Now, you might imagine that if we do that every time we potentially, do some level of grouping or add some filter criteria, change something else, that can be kind of expensive in terms of performance. And so in the interest of giving yourself the best reporting experience and not constantly waiting for the data source to bring information back, and also just not hammering the database, we recommend keeping that live data off as we go through a series of iterative changes here. So with that in mind, we've turned our live data off. We're going to make some changes, and I'd like to draw our attention to this little blue circle that's next to each given field name. And if we click this circle, this opens our radial menu, and that's going to provide some additional functionality to us. Now, going to the right-hand side, we can see this is where we can choose to filter by a given field. If I go ahead and click that here, we'll see that this adds a filter to the filters pane on the right-hand side. Here, we can modify filter conditions to either include or exclude data elements if they meet certain conditions. So in this case, I think it would make sense for us to maybe pick a couple specific clients that we want to see on this report. With that in mind, we can see that currently our client name is equal to nothing. We haven't selected any values yet. But if we want to see more than one client, I think we want to change our operator here so that way we can define the filter relationship with this specific field. If I click the operator, we'll see a whole host of options that'll allow us to sort of structure this filter in whatever manner is going to make the most sense. And I think that here, because we want to see many potential client names, I'm going to set this to be is one of, so we can pick multiple possible client name values. If I click my value dropdown, we'll see that now I'm getting real data values from the source that I can select from. And we'll just check off a few of these for the purpose of the example. And now that I've set my filters in my tab here, I can either click the filters tab to collapse or reopen that tab. The other thing I can actually do is use the F key on my keyboard, and that'll toggle this pane on and off as well. Now, going back to that radial menu that we were talking about, if I go down, this is going to escalate the sort of a given field. Now, the interesting thing you can see here is if I open my sorts pane on the right-hand side, there's actually a sort for all three fields, even though I didn't necessarily explicitly click the sort for ticket status. These sorts are automatically added to the ExpressView each time we add a data field. Now, sorts are hierarchical, meaning that in this case, we're first sorting by our ticket ID, then by client name, and then by ticket status. Now, we can reorder these sorts as appropriate, and we can even flip the order of the sorts. So if we do need to go by descending order instead of ascending, we can toggle that here as well. You can see our dummy values will be altered to reflect those changes here. Now, similar to that filters pane, I can click my sorts icon here to toggle that pane on and off, or additionally use the S key on my keyboard. Again, whichever you folks prefer. Now, if I go back to that radial menu, we'll see that going left on the radial menu will simply remove that given data field. So if for some reason we wanted to take that off the ExpressView, we could go left on the radial menu to do that. The final option on our radial menu is to actually group by this given field. If we recall to earlier, when I hit that live data toggle, we saw the same client name repeated many, many times for each respective ticket and ticket status. So with that in mind, it probably makes sense for us to group by the client name here. So we can have our client name be a nice data label to introduce each section of those respective detail line items. Now, the other thing I'm thinking about here is it might make sense for us to group by ticket status within each client name. And with that in mind, we can actually create nested groupings here in the Express view. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's group by our ticket status. And we can see that that grouping is going to appear just under the grouping for client name. I do just want to pause for a moment. I know I said I wasn't going to take questions, but I saw someone mentioning audio issues. Can anyone just confirm that you folks are either hearing me okay? Okay, it looks like it's just Mike. So Mike, if you are having audio issues, we are recording this, so you will be able to come back to it later. And it looks like I am coming through okay, so you should be able to pick that up later. Okay. So as I was mentioning, here, now we've got that ticket status showing up as our nested grouping underneath our client name here. Now, after we've grouped by given fields, we're going to see that we'll have some different radial menu options based on what level of grouping we select. So if I were to select my client name grouping, going up is going to allow us to reorganize how we structure those groups. So if we wanted to group by our ticket status first, we could choose to move our client name to be the innermost level of grouping. If we click on client name now, we'll see that that'll move the group back up one level. So again, depending on which level we select, the options are going to be just a little bit different. Now, the other thing that we can do is potentially ungroup by a given field if we'd like. And once a field is ungrouped, that'll be when we have the remove option once again. Now, the other thing I do want to highlight here is as we created these groupings, our aggregations are now going to appear not just across the entire report, but for each level of grouping as well. If I jump to the final page here, you can see that we're going to get aggregations for each client name and each ticket status within each client name as well. Now, our tabular information is starting to look a little bit cleaner here. We're not going to see quite as much repeated information. But I think what I'd really like to do here is add a visualization to get just a little bit of flash on this Express view. So we can click the visualization icon here, and that's going to have the report builder automatically create a visualization at the top of the Express view for us. Now, I can specify my given chart type, and I think in this case I'll pick a stacked column chart. And if we go over to our data pane, we can see here that I'm actually showing by each ticket status a count of the tickets, and then my client names are going to be the series here. Now, while that's kind of close to what I'm looking for, I think I might like to switch this around. I think I'd prefer to see my client names be each of my respective data labels and have the series over here be the statuses. I'd like to see each client's tickets divided by status. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is remove my client name label. I'm going to say that instead of ticket status, let's switch this to be client name. I'll add a label back in. And now we've got our ticket statuses as the series over here instead of the data labels. Now we could jump over to appearance, and this is where we'll get a little more fine-grained control over the aesthetics of the chart. If we'd like to do some titles, potentially modify chart colors if we'd like. We can even assign custom colors where we can go in and define hexadecimal values if we want. And we can do some things with our chart data as well. But I think at this point, let's go ahead and hit that live data toggle again and see what our Express view looks like now. So again, we can see that there's a lot less repeated info here. And we can actually go ahead and click some of these group headers to collapse some of these levels of grouping if we just want to see that aggregate information. If maybe we start looking at the detail and we say, okay, just show me the aggregate, and now I'm done with demo client. So let's collapse that one and start looking at fashions by Vladimir instead. Now, the other really nice thing we can do here is if I look at this chart and I say, wow, our demo client here has a lot of archived tickets. I might want to go take a look at those archived tickets. If I select that series on the chart, that dynamically filters the data that we're going to see in the tabular information down below. We can actually select multiple series on the chart if we do want to do comparisons. And we'll still have the ability to collapse those groupings as appropriate. So if we click some of these series and we say, just show me aggregations, we can certainly get to that level if we'd like to. Now, from here, you might say, well, this is great, and it's awesome that I can see it in the report viewer, but what happens when I need to print this report off and hand it to my boss later this afternoon? And to that effect, we have our export option up here. And this is where we can actually export this ExpressView to any of the available downloadable types, those being Excel, PDF, RTF, and CSV. Now, the final thing that we can do here is actually save the ExpressView. And we've got the save icon here, but we will have to go to our settings here, and you can see my Chrome auto-filling with my name, and provide this ExpressView with a given name, an optional description, and a folder for it to live in. So to save this example, I'm going to say ExpressView example. I'm going to save it in custom. And now if we jump back to getting started, we can see the ExpressView example that we just created lives here. So I'm going to toggle that live data off. I'll give it another save just for good measure. And at this point, I'm going to close out the ExpressView and we're going to jump over to the Advanced Report Designer. So this designer is really going to give us more fine-grained control over how we choose to display various data elements. This report designer is generally something we'll want to take a look at and leverage whenever we find ourselves hitting the limitations of the ExpressView designer. So if we go and hit create a new report and we start to build an advanced report, we're going to immediately notice a difference from the ExpressView, and that we'll first have to go through the new report wizard. So the first thing we have to do is provide this report with a name, and I'll say advanced report example. I've selected the custom folder here, but I could certainly pick another folder if I'd like. And at this point, we have to get to the next tab here, and that's going to be our categories. Now, in order to access our categories, we can either hit next to go to the next tab of the wizard, or we can directly click the tab that we'd like to jump to. So here, we're going to select the categories that we can access on this given report. And just for some additional context here, adding a category does not mean that we have to use information from that category. But in a general sense, unless we know for a fact that we need to use information from a category, we shouldn't just include extra categories just because we think we might need them. We can always come back and add more categories to a report later on if we need to. But in a general sense, you never want to have extraneous categories if you're not using them. Now, in this case, I think we're going to just stick with some familiar data. We'll use that ticket category again. And you could see I selected ticket and I clicked the arrow to drag it over. I could click and drag as well, or select and use the add button. But one of the things that we might notice here is that as we added ticket, a lot of these categories just became grayed out. And this is because behind the scenes, there's no logical tie between any of these grayed out categories and ticket. And so we can't form a logical report to display information with ticket and any of these other objects in line because the data won't actually have any real relationship. So we might create something that doesn't actually have a correlation, but present it in a manner that suggests it does. And that's something that we want to avoid as report designers. Now, an interesting thing we'll notice here, if for a moment I added my client data category, we get a lot of these options that become not grayed out once again. And the reason why is because ticket doesn't have a direct relationship with, say, person. However, client does. Because we can say ticket has a relationship with client, which then has a relationship with, say, person, that would be a criteria that says we can use person and ticket on the same report, and we can use the logical tie from ticket to client to person to ensure that when we show information between those objects together, it will make sense and be in context. Again, for this example, I'm keeping it simple. We're just going to use the ticket object here today. So the next thing that we'll want to do is actually define our sorts for this report. Now, our sorts in general define how the data is ordered on the report. One thing I would like to mention here with the sorts is that because we choose to sort by something does not mean that we need to include that information on the report's actual final display. By the same token, just because we display information on the report does not mean that we necessarily need to sort by it. That said, the other caveat to sorts is if we do plan on doing any grouping, very similar to the groups we made on client name and ticket status in the ExpressView earlier on, those groups must be tied to a sort. Now, as our sorts are hierarchical, for most general use cases, you will want your highest level sort to coincide with what you intend to group on. Continuing with a similar example to what we looked at in the ExpressView, I'm going to add sorts on both client name and on ticket status. You'll see here that as we add those sorts, we still have the ability to reorder them if we'd like, using either the arrows here. Oh, and it looks like I'll just have to jump back in. All right, let's get back to reports. And in this case, because we were working with an advanced report, that report is actually not saved until we complete the wizard. So let me jump back in. I'm going to go through the first couple steps a little more quickly, just in the interest of time, and since we already went through that together. So again, just giving it the name, selecting the folder. I'm picking that ticket category once again. We're jumping back to our sorts here. We had just added client name and ticket status. Now we can use the arrow icons here to reorder our sorts by clicking and dragging, or the arrows over here, again, whichever we'd prefer. We can also switch that sort order if we'd like, or remove the sorts as necessary. Now, hitting next, we're going to get to our filters tab. So again, similar to the ExpressView, this is where we're choosing what data to either include or exclude on this report. So if I was to again add a filter, and let's say we'll use that client name as another filter here. I'm going to drag that field over from the pane. I can drag, click, and use add, or click the arrow. Now, we can define that filter relationship between the field and the data values we select here. And so again, I'm going to set this to be is1of. Now, the other thing here is as we add multiple filters to this list, we can define how each filter interacts with the next filter in the list with this drop down here. Now, we'll notice two possible values. If we want all of our filters to work together, if every filter we add is a condition that must be satisfied for our data to be included on the report, in that case, we would want every filter to be set to be and with the next filter, have all of our filters work together. If I were to say want one filter or another filter to be satisfied, that would be a case for using the or relationship. And that would be a case where you might say, maybe I want my client name to be one of a couple possible values, or I'd like to see tickets with potentially a high severity. Now, if I were to, as a quick example, maybe pull over that severity as an additional filter, one of the other things I can do, if I go back to client name, because keep in mind, a lot of these options are going to be, how does this relate to the next filter in the list? If I was to say, check this group with next filter, you can see that now my client name and severity in the summary that's being built out to give me a bit of a logical way to look and say, what are these filters choosing to include or exclude? Now we can say our client name is going to be one of whatever values we populate here, and that's that and with next filter, our ticket severity is equal to whatever value we pick here. Now when I uncheck group with next filter, you notice that those parentheses that were there go away. And so now we're evaluating these filters at sort of the same level, if you will, as any other possible filters we might add. And if I drag class over for a second, we see that here. If I go back to client name and I check that group for value, with these parentheses, that basically ensures that these two filters are going to be operated at the same level with regards to order of operations. So if we do find ourselves adding, many filters here, and we want to create some logical groupings to say evaluate these two filters together first, then and that together with the next filter, that would be a case to use this group with next filter. Now, again, we're going to keep it simple for now. I'm just going to use my client name filter here. And we can click the drop down here to specify some specific values. But what I'm actually going to do is hit this prompt for value. And that'll allow us to actually dynamically select filter values each time we execute the report. Now, the last part of our wizard here is the layout tab. And this is where we're defining the actual data fields that we want to display on the report. Now, I can add data fields by either double-clicking on the list here, and I can double-click my client name. And I can drag fields from the list as well, very similar to what we've seen before. So maybe I'll, again, just pull in our ticket ID and the ticket status, just keep it simple. We can see a preview down below is being built to give us some idea of, with some dummy data, what this report is looking like. Now, from here, we can use this Summarize By box. And on selecting, this will be where we can actually define some grouping if we'd like. Now again, we notice our ticket client name and ticket status. And as we recall earlier, those are the fields we created sorts on. And that's why we can see those options for our summarization here. I could say add space before each unique item. And let's include a header at the beginning. So now we'll see that client name as a nice label, very similar to what we saw in the ExpressView. I'm going to go ahead and check include a total at the end as well. Now, an interesting thing, you might notice that our preview really isn't changing here. And if I click away, that's because in order to include a total, we need to define some summary function similar to how we had those aggregations in the ExpressView. Now, in this case, I don't think I need to set summary functions for client name and ticket status, but I do want to see a count of those ticket IDs again. And now we can see the preview down below is going to show us that, yep, there will be a count generated for the ticket ID column. Finally, I'm going to check grand total, and that'll create a ticket count for the entire report for us as well. With all that said and done, let's go ahead and hit finish so we can save this report. We'll see that open up in our report tree there and getting started. And this takes us to the full advanced report designer. Now, this is where we can actually directly go in and edit individual cells of the report if we'd like. And we can use our toolbar here to get more fine-grained formatting options and make changes as appropriate. We still have access to that data fields pane. So if we do potentially say, oh, I'd like to add maybe another column to the right-hand side, I can click any existing column to do that. And then I could go ahead and say, well, maybe I want that billable field. I could drag that over to the report like so. Now, you might be thinking, well, if I do add that new column, I've got, all these different rows in that column. How do I know where exactly I should include that data field? This is really going to lead us to the sections of this report. And I'm going to expand this a little bit so we can clearly see those section names. Now, each section specifically dictates where and how often the rows and data elements in that section appear. A page header is going to show up once at the top of each page. A group header on a given data field will appear once for each unique value of that data field. So in this case, each unique client name will show rows 4 and 5 once on our report. The details section shows one row for each row returned from the data source. Our footer, again on that client name, is going to show up the same number of times that the header on the same field will, but this is going to show up at the bottom of each collection of individual detail rows. So you can almost think of our header and footer here as our initial data label, as well as the final aggregation for each chunking of detailed data. You can think that this detail section here is going to be broken out by whatever groupings we choose to define. The final section we see here is the report footer, and this is where we can show similar aggregations on what we're doing for each client, but do them across the entire report. The formulas that we might choose to include in Exago are contextually aware. So even though in theory this is actually potentially the same formula, it will know to calculate its total for each client and for the entire report based on the section it was included in. Now, if we needed to, we could go and add any existing sections using the Add Section button by clicking on a previously existing section. Now, what I would like to do is just shed a little bit more light on what we view as a fundamental part of report design in Exago. So we're going to add some highlight color to each of these sections to very clearly show where each section of our report shows up on the actual output. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and select an existing cell in my page header, and I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard and click this cell in the page header, and we can see that that is going to complete the square, if you will, and highlight all cells between the first and last cell that I selected. This allows me to make formatting changes to multiple cells at a time. So here, I'm going to make all of our page header just a light shade of blue. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make the group header section here a light shade of yellow. I'm going to say for the detail, since this is going to have lots of individual records, let's use some alternate row shading. So we can actually click on the section, click on alternate row shading, and I'll assign 2 lines here, 2 colors to alternate between, where those will be white or transparent, and just this light shade of gray. We're going to have our group footers here, and I'm going to set these to be purple. And then finally, we've got this report footer row, and I'm going to set this one to be red. So everything is nice and distinct here. And let's go ahead and execute this given report. And at this point, we'll see that prompting filter come back into play. So now, as the end user executing this report, I get to go ahead and say, okay, show me these 5 clients. And when the report completes execution, we're now going to see the page header appearing first, followed by our first group header. We can see those detail rows showing up with their respective alternate row shading. We can click through and see any number of detail records for our demo client here. And let's see, if we click through a few more pages, we'll get to that first group footer section so we can see where that finally appears. And you'll notice at the top of each page, we've still got that page header section. And then finally, the first purple row, that's that first group footer for the client name. We hit our new client name, Fashions by Vladimir, and we can see another group header appears, followed by the resulting detail rows, and once again, that group footer. Jumping all the way to the end, we're going to see finally at the end of all of our groupings, once they've all completed and shown all their detail, we'll finally see that report footer information displayed as well. Now, something we can think about here, if we jump back to the advanced report for a second, we're showing our client name up in this header here, but then we're also showing the client name repeated over and over in each given record here. And similar to the ExpressView, we really don't need to do that here, right? If we're showing it as a data label to introduce each collection of detail rows, we don't need to show that information repeated over and over. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and remove this client name column. If we execute again, we can see it's just going to be a little bit cleaner, and we won't have quite as much information to just keep reviewing over and over on each row. We could likely do something similar with status here if we'd like. Now, we're going to be moving over to dashboards now, but in the interest of using this report on that dashboard, I'm going to remove the prompting filter here, as I'd like it to display all of the content that we're going to see for each client on that dashboard. So I've saved this report, Advanced Report Example, and what I'm going to do now is close this report out, And let's go ahead and open up a dashboard. Now, on creating this new dashboard, we'll see in just a moment that this is going to open up a blank interactive canvas. And we can populate this canvas with new tiles. And that'll be done by selecting the new tile option and dragging here. Now, when we add this new tile, we'll see that it will expand to encompass whatever section of the dashboard I'm dragging it most towards. If that's right in the center, it'll be the whole content. If I move up to the top here, that's going to be the top half or potentially the bottom half if I do the opposite. And we can see the same on the right and left-hand sides as well. So I'll set this to be the top half for now. And on adding this tile, we can see we've got a few options for what's going to populate this actual tile. So this could be a new visualization we build on the fly, a URL that displays an embedded page, an image or static text, an interactive filter to control some of the tiles on the dashboard, or potentially a pre-existing report item that I've already designed. So to kick this off, let's build a new visualization and make something that we haven't created previously. So I'm thinking that here, we're going to display tickets per each level of priority. So what I'm going to do is with the data pane open here, I'm going to open up that ticket category, and I'm going to drag ticket priority over to be our chart labels. And then I'm going to grab that ticket ID to be our values. So now we'll be counting those ticket IDs per each ticket priority. Now over on the right-hand side, this is where we can once again modify that chart type if we'd like, or potentially go into our data to modify some of the data labels or data values that we're displaying as well. We'll have some aesthetic options in the style, and then we can use settings to modify things like our reload interval, potentially include the search box if we'd like. So we've added this simple visualization. Let's go ahead and add the report that we just finished to the dashboard as well. So I'm going to drag a tile over, and I'm going to select pre-existing report. And we can see this will open up the report tree for us. So we can just drag that report over onto this tile. I'm going to go ahead and drag that advanced report example that we were just looking at. Now, as we've added this report, we've got some options for each given tile. We can potentially choose to delete, duplicate, or expand a tile to take up the entire content of the dashboard. We can manually refresh this report, and if we wanted, I could potentially go ahead and directly open that report designer. And maybe for the context of this dashboard, I decide that I want each of these headers to show up green. You can go ahead and make that change here. I'll save that report, come back to my dashboard, and now if I hit refresh report, I'll see those changes that I just made to the underlying report structure. Now, let's go ahead and add an interactive filter. So I'm going to drag a tile over to the bottom right space that we've still got available. And I'm going to select that filter option. Now, the first thing that we can set is what type of filter we want to use. Oh, all right, we'll have to just log back in quick. And again, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to make those first couple changes that I added to the new dashboard a little more quickly, just so we can jump back to the filter stuff that we were talking about. So I'm going to build that visualization again, jump into ticket. I'm going to grab ticket priority as my labels. My ticket ID is our values. Use a nice little column chart here. New tile down below. Existing report, advanced report example. And finally, our filter here. Okay, so Back to talking about our filters, we can choose the type of filter that we want to use, being either a single select where we'll have a single select dropdown. We can specify multi-select where we'll have multiple checkbox options, or a single or double range slider if we'd like. Now in this case, I'm going to go with the multi-select option, and I think what we'll do here is be able to dynamically and interactively specify which client names we want to see presented on the dashboard. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and select both the advanced report and visualization on the dashboard to be controlled by this filter. And the next thing I do is specify my filter field, how I want to alter the information being displayed here. Now, because both reports are using the ticket category, I can pick any field from ticket category to filter both those reports and visualizations, I should say. So here, I'll pick that client name. I could specify a default value if I wanted, but I think in this case, it probably makes sense for us to first start with all clients being displayed and then allow us as the end user to go and just pick which clients we want to filter down by. So at this point, we can actually go ahead and run this dashboard. And if I click Run Dashboard now, it's going to say, well, hey, wait a minute, you haven't saved this thing yet. So first, give our dashboard a title. So I'll say Dashboard Example. I have an optional description I can input here, and finally, I'll just select that given folder for it to live in. And then because we were trying to run the dashboard, it's going to say, well, we're not just going to save, we'll save and execute. So we're not going to force you to go back and click that Run a Dashboard item again. So from here, we can see the report displaying our client information. And this is actually going to have right-click interactive options if we'd like. We'll still be able to page through the report as necessary. We'll have our visualization showing up top here as well. And we can actually use the icon here to go back and see individual detail records if we'd like. And with visualizations, we can also click on any element that we've created on our chart to go right to that respective detail information as well. And for the filter, as I move my mouse over, you can see that there's going to be some dotted lines that show up to indicate to me which specific visualizations or reports we'll actually be able to control with this filter. If I were to go ahead and select Head Office here, we'll see that both a visualization and report on the bottom left will update their values accordingly. I could potentially specify multiple values here if I'd like. At any given point, if we think, oh, you know, I'd like to make sure that both my visualization and my report are going to execute against the data source again and get the most up-to-date information, we can hit this refresh button, and that'll go ahead and re-execute everything on the dashboard for us. We can also move this icon out of the way if there's some other content in the top right that it might be covering up. All right, and with just a few minutes to spare, that's actually going to conclude the content of what I had planned for today. Yeah, thanks for joining. And with that, I will leave you to it. So have a good one.